Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Parent Heroes podcast. My name is Zach. I am your host today, and I'm really excited for today's conversation. So, Jenny Drennan was introduced to me and recommended to me by a previous guest of the show. And I always ask when someone comes on, hey, who is someone amazing that you think I should meet, that parents should know about? And Jenny does some really incredible work in the world of supporting students. And it's kind of a blend between educational therapy, but also coaching, supporting not just what's going on in the classroom, but life overall. And so I think today is going to be a really amazing conversation. Jenny, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Zach. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you.
What a good vibe you bring. Like you being in this space, you just have this warmth and a smile and an energy that just comes out immediately. So thank you again for coming on.
Thanks. I could say the same about you. I'm trying to match your energy, and I don't think I'm there.
Our cheeks might hurting by the end of this, but let's kind of jump in. So you work at a company, I think co-founded with someone, correct, called We Thrive Learning. And this is a blend of educational therapy and ADHD support along with coaching. Could you talk to us a little bit about the company itself, but also the larger umbrella of the type of work you're doing?
Yeah. So I am actually a former business turned admin turned teacher now, and then I founded this on my own actually. So working
Oh,
as
okay, great.
in my classroom, I've worked in the public schools, at private schools, you name it. And in working in one of my private schools, I came across an educational therapist who was supporting four of my students in the class at the time, which is a lot.
Yeah.
And I got really close to her. And so she introduced me to this field, which I had no idea what it was, being a teacher. Right. And so I loved it so much. Like we collaborated a lot to support the students in the classroom. And then from there, I decided I want to, pursue an educational therapy certificate. So I did that. And then I did ed therapy after school for a couple of years and then just did this on my own. And I can't tell you enough how rewarding this job is. I love it. But yeah, so educational therapy, because it's a field that even teachers aren't aware of. I think
Yeah.
now it's social media and after the pandemic, it's becoming more popular and it's beginning to spread. I know that in LA, Los Angeles, California, parts of New York and Boston know about this field, but in other states, it's not well known, right?
Yeah.
What we do is we work with students one-on-one who have diverse learning needs. So students with dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, autism, and we teach them and more, right? But we teach them specific. We create goals. We teach them in a way that works for them. So we teach them using different strategies and modalities, and we teach them how their brain is wired so that they have a good understanding of themselves. Right. So as an ed therapist, we're not working towards the grade. What we're really doing is helping the child learn more about their style of learning so that they can become aware of it and so that then they can learn how to manage themselves. So it's very different from tutoring. I do want to say that.
Yeah.
And then in working here, I was naturally gravitating towards quote unquote those resistant, those difficult middle school, high school students, right?
Yeah.
And come to find out, like all of them had ADHD. And so my practice just started in, specializing in supporting students with ADHD. So I went down this rabbit hole and researched everything there is to know about ADHD and how to support them. And in doing that, I found that coaching is really the best way to support adults and
Oh,
students with.
interesting.
And so how coaching differs is we're asking open-ended questions, bringing their self-awareness, helping them to process the thoughts that they already have. And so here at We Thrive Learning, we're blending coaching techniques with educational therapy. And I think that's what makes us pretty unique and special. And then that is why the majority of the students that we support are from fourth grade to grad school.
Wow, I believe it, and I love what you're doing so much. I'm curious, I have two questions for you on this. How is educational therapy different than traditional therapy? Maybe we could distinguish that for folks a little bit more.
Yeah, so therapy, right? They're working on depression, anxiety, of the theories. It's much more of a mindset, whereas in educational therapy, we're working on like the approach, the learning, right? So for example, in math, we're using base 10 blocks so that they can build and construct the math versus using symbolic symbols. So we're not
Mm.
going to use an eight, we're going to use a rod of an eight. And then we can teach the student how the math is built, right? However, we are looking at growth mindset, other things. So it does blend somewhat, but when it comes to treating someone who has depression, who has, anxiety, we leave that to the experts. And so what's happening, unfortunately, is we're seeing a lot of students that come in with depression and anxiety diagnosis. And so because we're their ed therapists, right, we want to support them in sessions with us. However, we collaborate very closely with their therapists on what sort of language they're using, and so that we can mimic the same language and also share with them what we're observing in session, or maybe that the child has shared with us that we feel is important for the therapist to know to support them.
I love it. When we talked before, I think the idea of it takes a village came up, and that this idea that it's not just siloed help, right? It's all connected, there's overlap. I think what you're offering people is incredible. The other question that came up for me is something I've often wondered about, having a dad who probably would have been pretty good on the spectrum growing up, myself having dyslexia that I didn't realize till I was an adult, as well as probably some form of ADHD. Do you think it's something that is a spectrum? Are all kids on it somewhere, or is there a hard diagnosis of this kid has ADHD and has to deal with these set of issues, and this one doesn't?
So it is a hard diagnosis in the sense that they have to meet a certain number of criterias and it has to be present in at least two different settings.
Hmm.
However, within that, right, there's a spectrum. So once the diagnosis is given to the child, there is a wide spectrum of like, every student or child with ADHD is going to function very differently. Same thing with dyslexia, dyscalculia, there's a spectrum of things. And so I think they need to cross a certain threshold, I'd say, to get the proper diagnosis. But then within there, like we have a wide spectrum. Same with autism.
That makes a ton of sense. And I wanted to ask because I think parents may wonder this themselves, or there's just so much talk about it that sometimes I feel like there's just an automatic assumption that everybody has something. And maybe it's not always the case, but we could all benefit from more help, more support. It's incredible what this does. So
Absolutely.
let me ask you, let's back up a little bit. I know you mentioned like you've been in business, you've been a classroom teacher, you've done after school programs. Back us all the way up to growing up. Were there certain themes or difficulties you felt, or certain ways of being raised that looking back, you think it kind of makes sense that you ended up going this direction with your career and the work you're doing?
100%. So we immigrated here from El Salvador. My mom is a nanny, so she was always working with children, right? Really young students, kids. And coming here as an immigrant, I needed to learn English language because we spoke Spanish in my house. And so, and my parents did as well. And so learning, navigating the school, requesting things, doing my homework. I really needed to lean on support from teachers, my parents. Like I remember my parents sitting next to me with a dictionary by their side to help me with my homework, right? And even though I tended to do pretty well in school,
Mhm.
um, and however, I never paid attention in school, like ever. So I very much I looked the part, like I was paying really close attention. My teachers always really had wonderful comments to say about me on my report card. But I would get home and have no idea what we just learned in the classroom, right? Or like, yeah, so I would have to either reread it, do something to kind of like tune in again to the material. Um, and at home, I was sometimes pretty scattered, really organized in some ways, and very scattered in other ways. And come to find out in my 30s that in doing this work, I started saying, well, gosh, all of these, like when I like something, I hyper focus on it and when I say I do a deep dive, it is deep. And so in learning everything about ADHD and supporting my kiddos, I was like, maybe I should go get evaluated. And sure enough, like I have ADHD. So I mean, I can see how and why I naturally gravitated towards these kids and really wanted to support them and their families because I got them, right? I understand what they're going through and what's happening at home.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. It's so beautiful how life works out, isn't it? It's not always a linear journey, but there's definitely a story there, and there's so many threads connecting it. And I love hearing about all that you've done. And I want to transition a little bit because I know that there are some parents listening, there's other educators. I want to get into like some takeaways because I think that your work you do, some of it is very innovative and cutting edge, the latest science and what's actually being proven to help and testing. But some of it is just like core basics of life and living well that no surprise, they're totally connected to our performance and our education and our wellness and everything. So there were some themes that we had talked about. I want to go back in my notes here a little bit and get into some of these a little bit. So one of them that came up that I love that you said it. I wasn't expecting it, but structured versus unstructured time. Could you talk to us a little bit about what the difference, how we identify each type of time, but also the effect you were talking about of having more unstructured time and the benefit of that for kids?
Yeah, I think this one is I mean, this is an issue that we're facing globally, right? But more so nationally, and you'll see it a lot more prominent in like the larger cities. So Boston, New York, San Francisco, LA, where I'm not saying academic competition doesn't exist in everywhere else, but in these areas, it is the academic pressure that students are experiencing is beyond what is considered normal or healthy, right? And so parents, no fault to parents, I think as a society in general, schools, coaches, teachers, parents, friends, the community in general, we're putting so much pressure on our students to outperform, right? And so it's never enough. It's always more and more and more. Jennifer Wallace just came out with a beautiful, great book called Never Enough, actually. And she goes in depth on this topic. But yes, like we're expecting so much of them, and the of getting into college is just like, it's becoming more and more difficult. And so what's happening is these kids are doing more and more and more, and now they're reaching a level where they're at capacity, right? So we had some students, in working with us, we were able to navigate so their summer looked different, but coming into us, their expectation was to take a couple of summer classes, not one, a couple of summer classes back to back, and basically have no summer break, right? Well, we know that the brain needs breaks. We need these their brain is developing. And when we think about the brain that they're developing right now as a teenager, it's a pretty stressed out, anxious brain because they are always on the go, go, go. They have no time for themselves. And so this is a really pivotal time for them because it's the brain that they're going to carry into their adulthood, right? And so we want to really think about what sort of brain are we, right? What's important for us? What type of brain do we want this child, or do they want to develop? And so I think we really need to consider that. But unstructured time, again, because they're in sports, they're in extracurriculars, they've got tons of AP classes, they're volunteering, they're working, it just goes on and on. They don't have time to just be kids, right? This
Oh,
unstructured time is super important for them because it will allow them to pursue their passions, right? Things that they're really interested in versus, just doing physics all day long after school, right? So we want them to pursue their passions. We want them to spend time with friends. Social connection is really important. And I'm not talking about, social media, social connections, although it does serve its purpose sometimes. I'm talking about one-on-one, like in-person engagement with each other, right? We want them to be fine with being bored. They need to understand and learn how to deal with discomfort. We want them to pick up a book and read and, do things that they don't play. We want them to play. That's where creativity soars, their stress levels reduced. But these kids are like a rubber band that's being stretched. And what happens when we stretch that rubber band so much is eventually it snaps. right? And so that's what when we see these kids experience extreme overwhelm, depression, and want to really just give up. And so I think, we need to really tune into what they're going through and schedule unstructured time for them. We need it as adults, they need it as well.
Yeah. I am so glad you spoke about this, and I think you put it all really beautifully. And, for folks who don't know, I'm in a college coaching business. You can see her in the background, Kate Stone, one of the top college coaches in the country. And, I have a background in education and I do a lot with the college prep stuff. So I'm seeing these kids, and we often have parents coming to us, and we have tried to become more conscious. And I'm going to take away from this, like, I love what you said, scheduled unstructured time, because it doesn't mean just I'm sitting there on my phone the whole time. It's allowing that process to get bored, you said, and then use that boredom to pursue what you're interested in. And God, it's such an important thing for all of us. So I hope that parents can take that away as a tidbit and just a reinforcement, because they probably already know it and are wondering, oh my God, are these kids overwhelmed? So um,
And it's hard, right? Because our
mhm.
as their caregiver, as their adult is, well, if everyone else is doing it, what's going to happen to my child? So it's definitely something that I think needs to be addressed at the higher levels, and for it to start trickling down for us to really prioritize it.
And if it is helpful, the approach that we take, which is extremely successful even for the most competitive schools, is that kids who pursue their interest at a
Yes.
level that's beyond a club, they do something just epic with it. And that means that it's not time doing these other checking the boxes, but these kids are one, happier, more interesting, better developed, and higher acceptance rate. So hopefully parents can hear that as like it actually does benefit you overall. You're not hurting your kids to do this. So
Exactly.
let's talk about a very related topic, and I think a hugely important one, and that is sleep.
Mm.
How does sleep factor in for the students that you're working with? Because I think that this is an integral part of um, what you're checking on and you've seen effects of. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about sleep at a high level.
Yeah, we really look at our children's sleep, particularly because when a child has ADHD, sometimes they're medicated. Whether or not they're medicated or not, usually they have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, right? And so they can go to bed at 9:30, 10, and be up really bored up until 1 because their brain is just so wired. They're just go, 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 go. And this is really frustrating for families. The other part that's happening is a lot of teenagers, preteens too, are bringing their phones, social media into their bedrooms,
Yeah.
and they're up on, late at night, just browsing and scrolling. And so parents think they're asleep and they're not. And so we really look at sleep because we do think it's imperative that children really begin to prioritize their sleep and understand the effects that it has on their brain and brain development. So rather than just telling them, you need to sleep 8 hours, because the guidelines say you need to sleep 8 to 10 hours a day, we really want them to understand, so that they can make a cognitive decision and say, yes, like this is something that's important to me and I need to prioritize. So once a child enters their teen years, their melatonin at night tends to drop, right? So they don't actually get that hit of melatonin like we do until later in the night. And so that is why they want to stay up later, in addition to all these other things I just spoke about. But then they also want to sleep later during the day. So a lot of schools are now making an effort to start their days later, and because they understand how these kids are being wired. So I think for kids, at least when I was in college, in some sense now, kids wear like getting very little sleep almost like it's a badge of honor, right? Oh, I just got 6 hours. I was up all night doing my studying for my test or something. So they want to portray that there are these late owls, that they're staying up late at night, that it's cool to do this. Right. And I think we need to flip the script here, because if we can flip it so that it's not cool, so that they can really understand why, I think we'll see a change in everyone. But what happens to the brain is, when we are sleep deprived, if we're getting 6 hours of sleep, even if a child gets, there was a study done where sixth graders got less than 35 minutes less for 3 nights in a row, their cognitive performance was 2 grades below. So they were performing at a grade
Whoa.
level just by sleeping 35 minutes less for 3 nights in a row. Other research will show that if we sleep 6 hours, we will function as if our alcohol blood level is at a 0.05%, right? So um, it's telling us that our cognitive performance is not at the level it's supposed to be. It's not optimal. And so what happens is, especially with kids that have ADHD, their prefrontal cortex, so the area that involves planning, organization, task initiation, it's just all their ADHD symptoms are exasperated. In
Uh,
addition, because we're so tired, we tend to get more irritated, right? Anyone says something to us and we're upset. And so what happens is we tend to view the world more negatively. And so that impacts relationships as well. So it's really important that, our kids are prioritizing their sleep so that life can just be smoother in general for them. They can
yeah.
have better, meaningful relationships, pay more attention, be more alert in class. It even impacts sports actually, because if a child is sleep deprived, right, they're more prone to injuries.
Yeah.
So many different levels where we can get a child's buy-in to really help them prioritize sleep. But I think it's something that we need to focus on.
Is there a bedtime in your experience that, because I know if you're up later, certain things in the body don't get a chance to fully do your blood cycling, others, do you have a like, not gonna hard quote it, but like a rough ideal bedtime so that they can get the sleep that they need? Is that something that you've found or recommend?
I think the more and routines and structure that's in place, the most more helpful it is for the child. Routines are really hard for people who have ADHD.
Mhm.
If a child has it, maybe an adult in their life also has it, right? So I can see how it can be challenging to implement these routines in place. But the more routines that are in place, the decision making's done, the brain starts getting used to it, right? And even though the ADHD brain will fight it, eventually, like slowly and, through many, many nights, it will come to have like a normal sort of bedtime between 10 to 11 p.m. A lot of kids incorrectly think that they will catch up on the weekends.
Ah,
And yeah, that's not sustainable, nor does the research say it actually does help.
yeah.
So that's the other, those, and it actually wrecks their nerve, rhythm even more because
Oh
now they're
yeah.
kind of in even more chaotic.
And I have memories of growing up, and my mom would say if she caught me up late, like, you're taking years off your life, son. That old motherly wisdom. And you kind of answered the question I was going to ask you a little bit of what can you do with kids who just don't want to go to sleep or have trouble with it? You mentioned routine over time can help. Are there other factors that a parent could use to, or even a student, so that they're tired when it's time?
Yeah, and again, this really depends per student, right? So some of our students will say reading a book is really helpful. Others of them will say they just get too engrossed in it, and now they're into the book, and now they're up till 3 a.m. So it really depends on the child, but a warm cup of milk is always really helpful. Putting your devices, your phones away at least 2 hours before, not doing anything that's too stimulating. So, sometimes for some people, exercise is pretty stimulating. For others, it actually helps them go to sleep. So
Yeah.
it really depends on the person and, playing and becoming aware of what works and doesn't work. Journaling can also be good. Listening to podcasts, again, for some people that works, others just get into it. So I think just coming up with routines that work for you and playing to see what works, doing one thing at a time is really helpful.
Ooh, I love what you said. One thing at a time. Test something for a while, even a couple weeks, not just a night or two, right? Like really give it time to see.
Test it at least maybe even just a week just to see if this is something that works. Yeah, I would say we need to test in one thing at a time to see what works and what doesn't work, right?
I love it. I love it. And I love that you said 8 to 10 hours, because in my head it's like 7 to 9, maybe 7 and 8. And I love that.
Well, I think for adults, I think adults can we're 7 to 9, but these kids,
Oh, interesting. But for kids, it really is the 8 to 10. Yeah, they've got so much development going on.
right?
Let's talk about another really important topic, something that's near and dear to both Kate and I was really happy to hear you mention it, and that's nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
First, maybe you could just back up a little bit, and how do you define or categorize nutrition? Because that can mean a lot of different things. And then maybe you could talk about the role it plays in all of this and how you use it in your work.
Yeah, I guess when I was referring to nutrition, I was talking about the food that we intake, right? Um, I think for students, I think they don't pay too much attention to this stuff yet, right? If you have ADHD, you get a dopamine. I heard someone say today a dopamine bomb, and I love that. So you get a dopamine bomb, right, of junk food from junk food. So Cheetos, pizza, macaroni and cheese, hamburgers, all the good stuff, right? Like it tastes good. So our brain wants more of that versus eating a salad, you know? So I think we need to show students, raise their awareness to that, and also processed food, right? Teach them how our brain, we have a different gut biome, right, in our gut. And we're learning more and more about how our gut is interrelated and interacting with our brain. Yeah.
Connected. Yeah.
So we even have neurons in our gut, is what we're discovering now. And so we really, if we think about, eating these processed foods, they have no nutritional value. And so our kids are metabolizing things that are actually exasperating, again, their ADHD symptoms, learning differences. So the more, if the more healthy we eat, the more clean and whole and organic we eat, the more you're going to, your body's going to function differently because it's getting the right nutrients, the energy. Whenever we see a child too, and they're just coming and they're kind of in a funk, right? Nothing's really going on, and they're no, everything's fine, but we can tell something's going on. We ask them, when was the last time you had some water? Because even something as simple as that can make a huge difference to their nervous system. Um, and so that's always something we're looking at too. So artificial dyes, processed foods, non-organic, and I know organic is more expensive. So it's, that's something that we need to work on as well as a society. But the more whole and clean we can eat, the more nutrients the child will get, which will help them to function better.
I love it. So many questions here. I actually started school in ag school. I'm from DC. I wanted to do small scale organic gardens on the rooftops, and that's
Well,
always been something really, really meaningful to me. And even though I don't eat healthy 100% of the time, it's at least in the upper 90s, so that we could have these things. I'm curious if you could share a story with us, if one comes to mind, because it's also very hard I have so much admiration for parents that are just feeding their kids, let alone feeding them healthy. And I know that that could be a tough process. Maybe money's involved, rethinking, extra time, attention, maybe even changing your shopping routines. Do
yeah.
you have a story that comes to mind of a family who kind of had to struggle through that, but saw gains and benefits overall? Does anyone come to mind that you could talk a little bit about that?
Think it's really so I'm thinking of a couple of students, right? So I can speak about a couple of them. But for ADHD, if kids are on medicine, right, sometimes their appetite is suppressed. So
Yeah.
they can go hours without eating. And so all of a sudden, once they are hungry, now they're ravenous, right? And so now they're just going to eat whatever's in sight. And typically when we're at that stage, we're going to go for what's the most delicious, which is junk food. That's what we want. And so working with parents, or I know parents will give their children protein shakes or really good hearty breakfast in the morning. So some oatmeal, some eggs and toast. And then also right when they pick them up, they'll have like another protein shake or a good healthy snack.
Yeah.
Because if we get to the point where the child is like out of control hungry, there's no stopping. They're just going to eat, sit down, eat a bag of Doritos and be nonstop until the bag is complete. So I think that's how parents have kind of managed it, kind of working around the times that their medication is wearing off or it hasn't started yet. The other is really picky eaters because a lot of our kids have really their sensory needs are they're really sensitive, right? And so texture, temperature, all of this stuff parents need to consider. And so it's also, that adds an extra layer of complexity to it because it's, now we have a picky eater who's also their times to eat is very limited. And, they want the junk food because that's what they like again. So I think this is especially difficult for families who have younger kids, like elementary, kindergarten age, Once kids get older, their palate expands, and then they start to, want to take care of themselves a bit more. So there is a little more buy-in on their end. But for parents that have younger kids, I think it's a little more challenging. And it's something I hear a lot of times, that they're trying to sneak in the vegetables and the broccoli, and yeah, it's a difficult thing that parents are experiencing.
Oh, I feel for it. The little girl who will only eat raspberries and chicken nuggets, and won't do anything else. It's definitely something. Now, one thing we haven't talked about, and then we'll kind of wrap up this nutrition because I want to get into some bigger topics, but we didn't talk about sugar. And in our last conversation, you mentioned something about sugar that makes total sense in its connection with ADHD, but I never thought about it. And I'm someone who, anybody who knows me is like, man, that guy has a sweet tooth. And I really have to be disciplined and not do it. But it made so much more sense to me why I crave sugar and why growing up that was something of a struggle for me. Could you maybe talk about how sugar specifically plays into all of this?
Yeah, I mean, it goes along with the junk food, right? It feels good, it tastes good, so we get a lot of dopamine from it, and so our brain wants more and more of it. And so what happens is we'll eat it, and then we have a big sugar crash afterwards, right? And so yes, it's challenging for quote unquote neurotypical people who don't have ADHD, but even more so for kids that have ADHD. Because then now they're in a bad mood, they're in a funk, they really have no energy, they're not going to want to do their homework, so it's, but again, once they start, they're getting that dopamine, their brain knows exactly what that's going to feel like. That's what they go for, that's what they want. So I think, under having healthy snacks around the house, removing snacks that are unhealthy. Maybe it's one strategy to do this, but it's again, there's no easy fix here because they can go to the vending machines at school. They trade snacks at school. So there's no easy way around this.
There's no easy way, and that's why, like we had talked about, one of my goals for today is like, hey, they might find some new interesting tips, but hopefully some of this for folks listening, it's just another reminder to help strengthen it, and it's an ongoing process. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that we could talk all day about this stuff, but I want to get into like one of my favorite topics. And for those who don't know and are just hearing this for the first time, I have a background in education as well. I worked in the classroom, I've worked inside and outside, I've done curriculum development, and now we have a college coaching business helping kids get into college and prepare for it. But my real goal and hope and what we're growing this to serve is to help solve what I just call the education problem.
So cool.
And I think that the education problem means different things to different people. For me, being in this industry, it's usually the stuff that doesn't get included in school. Some of the most valuable life lessons that you're not going to learn in the classroom. How do we structure that? How do we help kids pursue their passions, but in a way that they won't be starving artists and
Mhm.
actually be able to support themselves and live rich, full lives, right? So for me, that's how it kind of connects. But I'm curious for you. I think you have some interesting insight into what do you see as some of the major problems that the institution of education, but also the holistic world of education is facing at this moment. And we'll kind of keep to this country because that's what we are working in here. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there's so much good in our education, right? And there are so many different ways we could also enter this. I'll enter it from one lens, like you said. But yes, one way is, the social pressure that we're putting on these kids, but we've already talked about that. The other way is, I think, our teachers, right, getting trained in when you're going through and you're getting your teacher certification, you do not get trained in much in learning differences or in ADHD. And so the perception that, and this is no fault to teachers by no means. Teachers work they're working so hard. They're doing all that they can. They're really great people. It's just that we're doing our students and them a disservice by not teaching them about learning differences or ADHD while they're getting trained. And so what we happens is kids are being misdiagnosed, undiagnosed, right? Kids are going through graduating through grades and not getting the right proper support or accommodations that they deserve to learn. And a lot of times, and I was at fault to this. So, I'd see a kid and I would think they're lazy, they can do it, they just don't want to do it. They're messy. Oh my gosh, after all this time we've spent, now they're doing it again.
Yeah.
because I had no understanding. You don't know what you don't know, right? And so I would have conferences with their parents. They would get in trouble. They'd sit at a different table. So all these things I was doing when I look back, and I'm so embarrassed by doing all of this, but I didn't know better.
Yeah.
Now that I do know better, I think about all those kids that were missed when I was teaching, all the support and the accommodations that I could have given them, instead of having conversations with the parents on their behavior, right, addressing, the need for an evaluation so that we could support the child.
Yeah.
So again, I wasn't, supporting the root cause of the issue. I was taking aim on their behavior and what I was seeing from the outside, and that's just not the way to do it. And so, huh.
Oh, little puppy.
Okay, sorry. Amazon must have come and my dog just had
All
an
right.
So yeah, so I think that's a different way of looking at it, is that, in order to really support a student, a lot of our kids that have ADHD are diagnosed as having ODD, right? So again, we're addressing the behavior and not their functioning, which is the
Interesting.
ADHD. And so this is so, it harms their self-esteem, their confidence. They begin to see themselves very differently. Their relationships with their teachers and their parents look vastly different. And so I think, that is one area where I think we could focus on, so that we could get a lot. There's 20% of our kids have a learning difference, right? And that does not include all the ones that are being undiagnosed. So I
Uh,
think we need to really look at this to really support all of these kids that are missing.
wow. Well, okay, I'm so glad you brought this up. And I think even though we're in a world where some parents might feel we're hyper aware of learning differences, overall, we still probably have only scratched the surface and how to differentiate and support and see. I have a question for you on this, which is if there's a parent listening or there's a teacher, you've deep dove, and anybody who's in education, they know how to deep dive. But are there like single books or a certain resource that kind of come to mind for you, or someone could pick up to at least like understand this a little bit more? Maybe they have concern that their kid might need to be diagnosed. Maybe they already have and they're just trying to support it or understand it better. Do any resources come to mind for you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I think with social media now, right? Everyone is throwing information out there, and we really want to be cognizant to the quality of the information that's coming out and
So
who.
much information. Yeah.
So I always tell parents, have your three quality, resources that you can go to. Understood is great. So that's for learning differences. CAD is a wonderful organization. They focus on children with ADHD. They have podcasts, they have presentations, resources, parent support groups, a ton. There's also Attitude Magazine. So they focus on ADHD, but if you have ADHD, I forget the percent, but it's very common that they'll have a learning difference with that, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
So, Attitude Magazine does a lot of work around that. Then in terms of books, there's Barkley does work. Leslie Giselle has really great resources. So, I do think they're really good books. We always want to look at the research behind it, and then also come to see, yeah, there's just a ton of stuff on there. So it really depends. If we're talking about autism, I can share some books with you, dyslexia, dyscalculia, but since the topic's mostly on ADHD, I'd say those are the resources I'd share.
I love it. And I love what you said of like, just because something's got an Instagram reel does not make it necessarily trustworthy. And I think more so than ever, it's good to go find stuff with good sources that's backed up by research. And we'll try to link some of these up for folks. But I just want them to have access to something. I know there's going to be at least one person that's like, I should probably dig into this more. So super helpful. Let me ask you this. Where do you see the evolution of this going? Like, let's look towards, I'm a little bit utopian, very positive, glasses full type of perspective on life. Where do you see this evolving to? What are some of the things that really excite you, and looking years down the road of where you think we'll go? could you paint a little picture for us of what you think um, a more powerful, a more integrated, a better overall education system might look like?
Yeah, I think in the last 5 years, we are making a lot of progress, right? I think content is being more curated and personalized to each student's needs. Teachers and parents are becoming more well versed in learning differences. Even the workforces are now, where they're beginning to consider accommodations in place because you don't outgrow your learning difference, right? If one if 1 out of 5 kids have a learning difference, that means 1 out of 5 adults in the workspace do as well. And
Yeah.
so, society in general is beginning to learn more about these diagnoses. So I am really, I would say, really hopeful where we're going. Unfortunately, the research tends to take about 20 years to catch up to really make a change, right? So we are beginning to see changes. I also think there's being more women in general are being included much more in studies. Students that are from a BIPOC background are being much more included. And so doing research on, how things differ by gender, how it affects the BIPOC community is also work that we're beginning to see.
Oh, so glad for it. And I love that you do the work that you do and you have this perspective and you're part of it. Like I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and I'm really glad that we get to be friends going forward and part of this bigger thing. So
Yeah.
maybe we can end on this. If a parent or someone listening feels like maybe I should reach out to Jenny. Could you just tell us a little bit about the kind of range of families and students and parents that might be a good fit for working with you so that they could better understand, hey, is this someone I should maybe contact and get in touch with?
Yeah. So if your child has ADHD and if they're in fourth grade to grad school, so our only ask is that they're in school and that they're between around fourth grade, right? If they have ADHD, I'm happy to connect with you. If they have a learning difference as well, if we don't have the right support, or I'll always refer them to someone else, another like vetted clinician who can support them. We also have a parent Facebook group called Parent Your ADHD Child with Confidence, and it just
Oh,
has
cool.
a ton of free resources on there for parents, and interactive Q&As. So
I
yes,
love it. And what does it look like to work with you? Is it kind of traditional therapy tends to be like a weekly ongoing meeting? Is there an assessment process? Is there kind of here's the info, do it on your own, or you're kind of staying with people through their journey, right? Could you talk a bit about how you work and what they could expect?
yeah, so typically a child, sometimes, not all the time, they'll come in with a psych ed report or a neuropsychological report. And so we'll read through that, start creating target goals for them, meet with the parents, do our onboarding, any additional assessments that we think are needed, ask the families to complete survey and the child about ADHD. And then that's how we create we start goal setting, right? So we do our internal goals and the child does their own goals. Then we support the child and we're periodically assessing the child to see if we're making progress. But yes, typically we'll see families who are with us for well over a year. Not that kids are making progress, right? But we want to continue that progress, and kids with learning differences need to overlearn material, and we really prioritize the relationships with them. So again, they want to come to sessions, see their coaches. That's the other thing. Like whether it's us or another company, right? And they need to feel some sort of relationship to the person that's supporting them. So I think, that's something we really focus on.
I love it. And I just want to give one last plug because it's particular to the work we do. We see a lot of students who have a good amount of support in high school, whether that's through the school or whether that's through private resources. And then they go off to college
Mhm.
with no real thought of how am I going to get this support. So we are often encouraging families to like either take advantage of the school as you're researching it, but chances are if you have extra support going in, that support should not drop just because now they graduated high school. And I love that you mentioned up to graduate students. Like I really want to encourage the parents of college age kids or the transitioning from high school to college to reach out to you because that can be it's already an abrupt shift going from high school to college, managing your time, grades are tougher, all of this, but to throw in not having that support can be really, really hard. And we see the effects enough that I really want to emphasize that point. So hopefully parents listening, if you're in that age range, like please reach out. Don't let the support drop off. If anything, let's crank it up a notch just to help them adjust to it.
So such a good point. Thanks for bringing that up, Zach.
I love it. Well, Jenny, thank you for coming on. Molly was right that you are a great person to connect with. I know you're a busy woman. I know you've got a lot on your plate. So the fact that you've taken time to have conversations and come on the show, I really am grateful, and I'm grateful for all the work you're doing as well.
No, it was a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for the conversation. And yes, continuing to collaborate and spread the word. Love the work that you're doing. I think, it's needed, right? And so with podcasts like yours and the work that you do, we'll start seeing change. This is where it starts. So thank you, Zach.
I love it. All right. Well, folks, if you got something out of this, you know what to do. It's time to like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And also, we're going to try to include some links here or roll back and listen to some of the recommendations. Reach out to Jenny at We Thrive. I think that she's an excellent resource for the families we work. I think there's a big overlap. And at the very least, just reach out and thank her for all the work she's doing. So, thank you again to everybody. Go out there and be great. We'll see you at the next one. All right, that's a wrap. We did it, buddy.
Good.
Wow. That
Thank
was
you.
a good.